Welcome to the Fallout Lorecast, the podcast that explores the boundaries of our knowledge about the world of Fallout. One of the more interesting qualities that I haven't heard many people discuss about Fallout 76 is the fact that it is set only just a few decades after the bombs dropped, and what that affords the writers, the view into the world of Fallout. Now, this is something that comes up on this podcast all the time, although I may not directly state it like this, but the opportunity for stories that take us back in the timeline and show us what the world was like and what Vault-Tec was like just a few decades after the bombs dropped is invaluable. It gives us insight not just into the pre-war, but into aspects of these organizations and the people of that time. The nature of the Brotherhood of Steel, for example, is addressed in Fallout 76. And although it's not over in the West Coast, it does give us some insight into what else was going on with that group. And likewise, Vault 63 gives us some insights about what is actually going on in Vault-Tec and the way that they manage their Vault program, along with a whole lot of other stuff. Because, again, we are only a few decades since the bombs dropped, and most of the vaults we come across in the mainline games have been around for a very long time. So many of them, we just have to piece together what might have been happening, especially during this time period, because everything is falling apart. With Vault 63, we get to see the exact process by which the vault is falling apart. We get to experience it for ourselves and take part in it. We also get to know who the major players are, not by just reading holotapes or listening to a recording somewhere that happened to have one little glimpse of someone's voice, but by talking to the individuals to find out more about what their motivations are. What are they doing in the vault? What are their actual roles? What are their relationships to each other? And how the vault was using the technology at its disposal to try to achieve something. So let's go back in time. The very first time that we heard about Vault 63 was in the earlier version of Fallout 76, before Skyline Valley came out 2 years ago and revealed more about this part of the map and this vault and the people who were involved. At that time, we were able to discover that there was a door with the number 63 on it, hidden on the eastern side of the map. There was no way to open up this door without hacking it and breaking the game, which of course caused some other issues. And so at that time, all we had was some speculation about what might be on the other side and if people were still in there. And it turns out that the people inside were not exactly what we expected. With the release of this update, we were introduced to a very specific type of ghoul, the Lost. They seem to have energy coursing through their skin. They seem to be crazed without necessarily being insane or feral. And this gave us hints as to more of the details that we were about to discover once we got into this vault. And getting into the vault wasn't a problem because the door was blown clean off. If we go back to those areas that we explored previously in Fallout 76, we found that that vault door, the same exact one that was hiding underground, had exploded onto the surface and now left a scar across the ground. There was some sort of explosion, some sort of major event, which created an opportunity to go explore a place that we didn't know very much about. Now, like usual, I'm not going to describe every little detail about the questline as you play through it. There are a number of choices that you can make, and because it is a live service game, you only get to make certain choices once, unless you want to create another character and play through it a second time. So there is a lot of variety, and your playthrough is your playthrough. There's no save scumming here. So I'm going to save that for those of you who don't want to know all of the nitty-gritty details, but of course this is a Lorecast, so there's going to be some amount of spoiling things here. So go check it out if you haven't yet. But with that in mind, be aware, spoilers. And what I'm most interested in here is who the individuals are, why the vault is here, and what is it doing? What is going on in this location? Well, it all starts with a man named Hugo Stoltz. Now, the first oddity here is that Hugo is clearly not an American. He is somebody who must have come from some German-speaking country before the bombs dropped. And he is a businessman, we come to find out that he is a ruthless businessman, that he is the kind of person who often believes that the ends justify the means. And being that he was a successful businessman and aware that there were rumors about the end of the world coming, he became involved with Vault-Tec, not just for financial reasons, although I'm sure there were some benefits there, but a lot of it was driven by his want to have a place for him and his family to be safe when the end times finally come. Now, we all know how it works for regular vault dwellers. You get assigned a vault and you just go in and you have no idea what is going to happen once you are in that vault. Most likely, you will be the subject of some experiment. But the way this works out for Hugo shines some light on some of how things may work for other important people in Vault-Tec. Hugo became a member of the board. He was an important individual, and being that he was a member of the board, he got to make specific accommodations for the way that he would be involved with a vault. First of all, he is the overseer. Vault-Tec decided to give him his own vault, but they wouldn't do it just under the explanation of needing a safe place to be. This vault needed to do something valuable to Vault-Tec as well. So there was an agreement. This would be a vault focused on research. And what kind of research? Well, of course, Vault-Tec is plugged into all sorts of details and clearly deeply embedded in information about the United States government and the kinds of things they were doing. And it turns out that in this part of the world, there was a failed program not too far away. The Atlas program plays into a lot of the details that we discover about the Brotherhood and their involvement in this part of the world. Through that questline, we learned that this was a failed program. The program was shut down. The Brotherhood now moved into this location because, of course, there was a lot of high technology that the Brotherhood was interested in. Specifically, Atlas was experimenting with how to control the weather. And if you think about it, that's a very important thing to be able to do. Imagine if we could control the weather. Imagine if we could protect ourselves from hurricanes or blizzards. And what if we could redirect them towards our enemies? That would be an amazing weapon. But the program failed, and Vault-Tec was aware of this. So they developed Vault 63 in part to take the information that they learned about the Atlas program and see if they could continue that line of research. But this wasn't the only information that Vault-Tec pulled from the United States government. Remember that little robot named Liberty Prime? Well, Vault-Tec was able to get a hold of those records, the information around the building, the construction, the design of this massive robot, which would have been used if it had worked as either a weapon of defense or offense against the United States enemies. So how does this play into Vault 63? Well, Vault 63 had a number of sectors that were working on a number of different projects. There was a meteorology sector working on Atlas and probably some other things, an organic sector, an engineering sector. The entire facility was underground and spread out. In fact, that first location we found with the door for 63 was actually an entrance to the underground rail system that connected all the different parts of the vault. This may be one of the most expansive, largest area vaults that we know about. It's hard to know for sure because we can no longer access each of those areas due to some of the things that happened in the vault. But at one point, this vault was massive and it had a number of different projects that they were working on. But of course, the timing was not perfect. The vault was being constructed and then the bombs dropped. Unexpectedly, according to the story with this vault, which highlights some things about the nature of who dropped the bombs that are probably worth discussing here, because one of the things that we know recently, due to the newest season of the Fallout TV show, is that Vault-Tec was planning, they at least had a contingency plan to drop the bombs themselves. But if that were the case, then vaults like 63 would have been prepared or at least had closed down all the openings that were currently under construction in order to make sure that the people in the vault were safe. This makes me think that Vault-Tec, although they planned to drop the bombs, weren't actually the ones who pushed the button. Now, you could make an argument that something happened and they had to push the button before it was planned, and whatever happened to the vaults happened to the vaults, and they were willing to take that risk. And I can see how that's a viable explanation, but it's not the main purpose of this episode to delve into all of those different arguments, but it is something interesting to keep in mind. And because the vault was still under construction, the bombs fell, radiation got into the vault, and that's why when you visit it today, everyone in the vault is ghoulified. And the majority of the people who were in the vault when the bombs dropped are no longer there. Most of them didn't survive. But the people who did survive include Hugo, and Hugo is ghoulified and is the only one in this vault who looks like one of the Lost who is not actually insane, or apparently insane. We'll get to more of that later. Hugo's wife also survived. Her name is Cassidy, and their daughter Audrey survived as well, and continued to work in the vault. And what's interesting about Hugo and Cassidy is that they deeply loved each other. Hugo, although he was a ruthless businessman who didn't really think twice about the things that he would do and how they may harm other people, he deeply loved his wife Cassidy. So much so that over time, as she started showing signs of ghoulification, he became obsessed with trying to solve that. And a potential solution was discovered in an unlikely place. Something about the weather machine that they were working on may have an effect on her feral ghoul condition. I'm not sure how the science behind that works, but there was enough evidence for Hugo in 2095, this is still a number of years before the events of Fallout 76, to try to use the machine in order to fix her, even though the technology was not finished. And it sort of worked. You see, it stopped her from going completely feral, but it put her into a coma. It effectively paused the ghoulification. Now, Hugo and his daughter and a number of the other people in the vault were not experiencing the same descent into feralness that she was. It seems to have only affected her, and she was now locked in a coma. And she stayed that way for 10 years. As of the release of Skyline Valley, the current date in Fallout 76 is 2105, 10 years after she was first put into a coma by the use of this weather machine. And after 10 years with the technology still not perfected, he decided to try to use it a second time. And that's what created the catastrophe. The explosion that sent the vault door up to the surface, the creation of the Lost, and the electric storm that is now over top of this area and seems to not be going anywhere. This was the cost. But it seems to have worked, or at least temporarily, but not completely. She woke up, she could move around and respond to him, but she still wasn't fixed. Not really. And now there were all of these other electrified ghouls around, and Hugo himself had been turned into one of the Lost. But again, he didn't lose his mind. In fact, he was the only one who remained sane, and something about what happened allowed him to connect to the rest of the Lost. The reason for this is most likely he was the guy who pushed the button. He was the guy who was at the epicenter of the machine when it was activated, and it changed him. And it didn't just change him by making him one of the Lost and giving him electric-looking skin. He was blind. He had been blind from birth. And he describes when you talk to him that he can now see shapes and movement, and he has the ability to perceive the world in a completely new way that is kind of like sight, but yet still totally something different. And this is what Hugo looks like when you meet him. All of these things have already happened. And his current focus now is a few different things. He's working with his niece, Hilda, in order to stabilize or cure the Lost thing. He may have some of his own intentions there. I'll let you get into that. But also his daughter, Audrey, is the one who is working on the weather machine because it is still not fully functional. It functions somewhat. There are connections between the weather machine and harnessing power in order to power the giant robots. That's a whole event thing you can do in the game. But the more interesting thing here is Audrey's relationship with her father. You see, Audrey met somebody that she fell deeply in love with. She got in an argument years ago with a woman named Alex Guerra. Now, Alex was not at all like Audrey. They were very different people, but this actually became an opposites attract sort of thing. They fell in love. By the time the vault was being constructed, Audrey asked Hugo if Alex could come live with them in the vault, but Hugo didn't like Alex because Alex saw Hugo as a greedy capitalist and a terrible person, which probably isn't inaccurate. So Hugo denies the request, tells his daughter that Alex can't come and live with them in the vault, and that becomes a problem. Audrey's relationship with Alex only deepens, and it becomes more and more apparent to Hugo that Alex's communist perspective is going to be a problem, and he wants better for his daughter, according to his view of the world. And so he decides to take it upon himself to fix the situation in a way that would solve it for everybody, at least in his mind. Now, none of them, of course, knew that the bombs were going to be dropping on October 23rd, 2077, but the week before that, Alex writes a letter to Audrey. She wants to meet secretly at the Makeout Point. It's one of those old-timey places, like in a 1950s movie where, the young people would go to be alone in their cars. You know how that goes. And we can still find Alex's letter. It says, "My gorgeous capitalist piggy." Of course, that's sarcastic and loving, right? "Please, my dear, I beg you to come with me. No good can come from a project funded by a big corporation. Please, please, please meet me by the Makeout Point next week on the 23rd, and we can flee together. Don't leave me alone. Signed, your beloved communist swine, A." So you can see how this is already a problem. This is the day that the bombs drop, but it gets worse from there because Hugo finds the note. He had thought that they may have distanced themselves now that they've moved to the United States, but that is not the case. So Hugo puts the plan in motion. Alex shows up at Lookout Point on the 23rd, and instead of finding Audrey, she finds one of Hugo's goons with a mission to end her life. But they couldn't have anticipated that at that very moment, the bombs would begin to fall. The goon never was able to kill her. Alex gets away and survives. Most likely thanks to a strange group of individuals she discovers while trying to survive the bombs dropping. She finds a cult of the Mothman. They take her in, she survives the bombs dropping, and eventually she becomes their leader. She and the other Mothman cultists all become ghoulified, or at least the ones who survive. And we find this letter in the old Cremora mines, written by Alex. "I miss her so deeply. I've always hated people, but I loved her. And being out here all by myself, well, I never felt more lonely. I wonder if Audrey could still be attracted to me after my change. I'm looking pretty grim these days. Wouldn't blame her if she'd think of me as a monster. I wonder if she changed like this too. I can't survive alone out here. Need to move on. Need to plan for how I'm going to get her back. How to ruin him and get her back." So you can see how this is shaping up and how the quest line could potentially play out. Audrey, of course, discovers that Alex is still alive. She discovers more about how sinister and terrible her father is. And of course, there are other details about how things play out with Hugo and Cassidy, his wife, and what happens when they decide to power up the machine again and your role with that. So again, I recommend playing through the quest line because your choices may not be my choices, and you might want to see your version of the story as the canon version. And there are a few different variations of things that can happen, but there are some things that, regardless of your choices, happen anyway. But that's just how these storylines in RPGs go, right? Some of the things you can actually affect, and other things, no matter how hard you try, work out in ways that you didn't expect or that you didn't want, that sort of thing. Now, there is one other individual at this location that is very interesting because it gives us some other insight into the way that not only Vault-Tec works, but the government as well. When we get to this vault, we meet a man named James Oberlin. Now, James Oberlin is officially Lieutenant Colonel James T. Oberlin of the United States Army, and he served at the Atlas program before it was shuttered. While they were working on setting up Vault 63, he was employed by Hugo because of his connections to the Atlas program. And as a military member, it made sense for him to run security. But James Oberlin is the type of guy who is a honorable, dutiful soldier. He's an honest sort of person, a straight shooter, the kind of person who just tells you what he's going to do, how he's going to do it. He doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't try to hide things. And when he was hired by Hugo, he very specifically told Hugo, all right, I'll work for you, but I still report to the United States Army. I will be sending them reports about what is going on here and any information that we gather about the use of this program or other things that they might find important. And Hugo said, that's fine. I'd like you to work for me anyway. And that seems a little bit odd, right? You would imagine that somebody like Hugo, somebody working for Vault-Tec, would be very careful about the information and the discoveries they were making, their research getting out to a bigger audience before they wanted to reveal that. Remember, this is before the bombs dropped. This is before they knew that they would be holed up in a vault and that the remains of the United States government may or may not even be a thing. And so James Oberlin starts working for Hugo. He starts doing his job. And as he said he would do, he starts sending reports about what is going on to the United States Army. But there's a twist. There's a reason why Hugo allowed him to do that. And it's because Hugo set up an intercept where James Oberlin thought he was giving his reports to the people who he was supposed to be giving them to, but in actuality, they were just more stooges working for Hugo. And yes, this is a twist. This is one of the things that comes out as you play through the quest line, so definitely go do that. And again, I warned you, there would be some of these things I would explain. And the reason I'm explaining this here is not only because it's interesting, it's kind of this fun, interesting twist, and there are some of those twists I don't cover, but this one gives us a really interesting view into the way that the government and Vault-Tec work. We know that there are people who are part of the Enclave, who are part of both. We know there are businessmen who work also in connection to the United States government. We know there are politicians who own or have stock in some of these corporations like Vault-Tec, and they've got their hands in those pockets as well. But one of the things that we need to be very clear about here is that they aren't all exactly on the same side. They aren't all just the same group of people who all have the same intentions to not work against each other, to not hide things from each other. You can see here that James wouldn't have decided that he was going to send these reports to the army, to the United States government, unless that was something they had requested of him because he was still an active lieutenant colonel, which means that the United States government is interested in the things Vault-Tec is doing, and they're willing to allow people to work with them in order to work as a type of mole. And it's not secretive. Again, James said that he would do it. He made it an open thing, so he was being honest. He wasn't implanted here as a spy, but it definitely shows that there is information that Vault-Tec is not willing to share with the government. And the government knows this, so they're willing to at least allow people like James Oberlin to work in a vault ahead of the bombs dropping to make sure that they can at least have that connection point out in the open. It's an interesting dynamic. And the other side of this is Vault-Tec, or at least Hugo in this case, but probably Vault-Tec as a major corporation is aware that the technology that they are working on is secretive. And they don't want it to get out. It doesn't matter who else is working for them. If they see an opportunity to close one of those holes to keep the information that they are studying to themselves, then of course they're going to take that opportunity. The corporations and governments in Fallout work very, very similar to a fantasy story like, I don't know, A Song of Ice and Fire, where you have the different lords and kings and individuals from different houses who are all kind of work together. They all intermarry. They all have to get along with each other. But each of them is really more about their own thing and sometimes not even trusting the people in their own houses. This is basically what's going on here. This is the politics of the world of Fallout, very, very much just kind of laid out for us to see in this scenario. So I think it's pretty cool. I would love to hear your thoughts on this too, because I'm sure there are details in this story that stand out to you and maybe ways that don't stand out to me. And I also feel like there are some things in here that aren't very clearly explained, like the weather machine being able to stop or at least pause becoming feral. That's a little bit odd. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but they are swinging for the fences. They're bringing back giant robots designed with some of the plans for Liberty Prime. They are effectively affecting the weather, not controlling, but effectively affecting the weather in severe ways with technology that had never been created before. And there's a lot of really interesting interpersonal stuff going on and some decision making that really changes the way things might play or doesn't. There's a lot here that feels very Fallout New Vegas in the way that all plays out, even though this is Fallout 76. And I don't hear enough people talking about this. People will go on for a very long time about how this quest line and these characters in New Vegas are connected in these ways, and it's really interesting. And then they'll just gloss over this stuff like, well, yeah, it's Bethesda, so it can't be as good. And it's not perfect. I'll leave that there. It's not perfect. There are definitely some holes in this plot, but there's a lot going on here that is interesting. And I think more of this kind of content showing up in a new Fallout game or an update for 76 would be amazing. But here's the most interesting thing about all of this. A board member from Vault-Tec gets his own vault. Now, we've seen this sort of thing before. Dr. Stanislaus Braun got to have his own vault, of course, with the VR setup and all of that. But how many other Vault-Tec, like high-ups, the CEOs, the main managers, people like Bud from the TV show, or people like Hugo, who happen to just be very wealthy members of the board, got their own specific vaults, not just to design the experiment or to be involved with, but as a place for them to survive themselves? I'm trying to think through other vaults that we have and how many of them have somebody that we definitely know played that sort of role. And yes, there are people who were extremely talented, bright scientists and things like that. But how many people like Hugo have their own vaults out there that we have not discovered yet? And was this a policy at Vault-Tec to give these powerful individuals each their own vault? This might be hinting at something even greater than what we've experienced so far. So worth considering. I think that's a very interesting thing about what we learn about, well, Vault-Tec with Vault 63. All right. Well, let me know your thoughts about that. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be back to thank our patrons, so don't go anywhere.
Sleep Number's new collections are designed to adapt to the changing nature of your life and your sleep needs. Whether it's the personalized comfort of the new Comfort Mode mattress, the targeted pressure relief of the Comfort Next mattress, or the Climate Collection that actively cools or warms to help you fall asleep and stay asleep.
And now, get early access to our biggest sale of the year. Save 25% on the new Comfort Next Luxe for a limited time. Only at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com.
If you have any questions about Nuka World, I'd be delighted to answer them.
I hope you enjoyed another Vault episode. Hey, we've done 2 Vault episodes recently. We've had a number of different Vault things to talk about, which is always fun and exciting. And thank you to everybody who supports the show and keeps it going. I couldn't do it without you. You can help support on Patreon, patreon.com/Fallout Lorecast. You can get ad-free episodes and, of course, join us for patron chats and some other stuff on there. And I have to shout out all of our Sentry bots, Germinator, Nova, The Main Monkey, and Ira. Thank you so much for your continued support. And to all of our paid supporters and even our free patrons. You can sign up for free just to be plugged in if there's announcements and things that go out. Or sometimes free members just get like these random discount offers and things like that. That happens as well. So go check it out. Also, thanks to everybody who shares this with your friends or leaves 5-star reviews like this one from Enclave Lover 209, who says the best Fallout lore podcast, a great podcast. As Homelander once said, not a Fallout character, but let's go with it. It was perfect. Everything down to the last minute detail. Thanks for taking the time to leave that review. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. Stay safe out there, and if somebody decides to turn on a crazy weather machine, then get out of the way, because you're going to turn into a Lost, and that's going to be a whole thing, and then you have to deal with Hugo and all the weirdness that entails. So, yeah, just avoid that. Stay safe out there. See you next time. To plug into everything else we're doing, check out robotsradio.net. Reach out to me on Twitter at robots_radio. Check out the Robots Radio Rocket Club, where you can join me and a bunch of our other creators creating your podcast, starting a new podcast, or helping your current podcast grow. There's more information about that on robotsradio.net as well. And you can always talk with us and the entire community, over 2,000 people on the Robots Radio Discord. Come join us. We'd love to chat with you. See you guys next time. Robots Radio. Games, lore, stories, community. Just press play.